City Council meeting, January 25th. Are you guys getting an echo? You guys okay? Okay. We're going to go ahead and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If Captain Williams would come up, lead us in the pledge.
Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, will you please join me in I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Jennifer, can you please call a roll?
Councilmember Avila,
Here.
Councilmember Beaver,
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Duncan,
Here.
Mayor Bogue,
Here.
and we have David Snow on conference call.
Yes, thank you.
All right, anyone else on conference call?
We have just two of the consulting firm that will be presenting the study session at the end.
Okay. All right, so that's going to take us to a special presentation. I'm not sure, is this CAL FIRE and
It's a team effort.
Sheriff?
Captain Williams, Grant's here, Chief Malnowski, and then followed up by Fermin Preciado, our Development Services Director.
all right.
So good evening. City Manager asked us to come and talk about impacts of COVID-19 on our public safety and other employees. So I guess I'll go first. So just to remind everybody, since March 19th of 2020, the stay-at-home order has been in effect. All of our patrol station staff were deemed essential. That means all the deputies and our professional staff. So we've all been coming to work every day since that time. It did have a fairly significant impact on our volunteer groups, which are our reserve deputy sheriffs, our search and rescue team, our citizens on patrol, explorers, and our chaplains. All of their group meetings, group functions were all canceled right after the stay-at-home order went into effect, which of course impacts how those groups function. In May of 2020, the search and rescue team and the reserve deputy sheriffs were allowed to return to their volunteer positions as long as they were not over age 65 and did not have vulnerable medical conditions. The citizens on patrol were not restored even partially until June 1st of 2020. But they still cannot have meetings, no group functions, and cannot ride with the deputy sheriffs. And this will likely to remain until the state lifts the restrictions on general mass gatherings, sporting events, and those type of things. As far as our employees, we've had 10 employees who've tested positive thus far. Luckily, none of them were seriously impacted and have all come back to work since testing positive. And that's basically our impacts on our employees. Obviously, we all remember when the stay-at-home orders first went into effect, calls for service went down, traffic, you saw the empty freeways, and that has all returned to pre-lockdown levels. And I think I'll just...
Really quick, do you guys have any questions for the captain? Comments?
No, none.
Has everyone received a vaccine that's requested?
We are currently in the current tier, so our deputies and other employees that wish to get the vaccine, it's now available to them. Started at the end of last week.
Good.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, good. Thank you.
Mayor, council members, impact of the fire department with COVID-19. So internally, we've had about a third of the city staff have had COVID spread throughout the year, and about a quarter of our larger units, so about 75 people total out of 300. No disruption in service. We actually entered into a countywide interagency management team to deal with COVID. So if we had nobody to show up to work today, other departments would actually help out and vice versa. None of those levels have been hit. Out of that, that's kind of where some other good things where we do have vaccination. We've already gone through round 2, so the folks who wanted to get it, I think about 75 of our folks in total have already had first and second round of vaccinations. And then we have testing set up for us. So obviously dealing with the 911 EMS calls, there's a lot of testing, so not just one time. With the recent surges, we've suspended reserve firefighter rideouts to reduce the amount of people exposed. We've stopped the LPS, which is our Law and Public Safety program with the high school. Also our EMT rideouts with Crafton Hills College. We have continued the paramedic rideouts just because it's so extensive. It's a 600-hour internship. If we stop those, that will really cripple the program and the available paramedics in our communities. There's a national shortage on paramedics. Call response for us, like the captain said, March and April, nobody wanted to call 911, nobody wanted to look at their neighbor. And then from about May to August, it was still low. And then since September, we've ramped back up to where we're busier than we were this time last year. So we're back up, especially December and so far in January. Huge surge that we're seeing in the 911 field. We're running about 10 COVID calls a day. And we normally run about 23, 24 calls a day for the 911 system, so we're busier than ever in a lot of COVID calls. We're trying to get good numbers for you today, but I only got ballpark numbers just because of some of the validation stuff. We typically run about 11 to 13 cardiac arrests in the field a month in the city of Yucaipa. We're about double for 2020 what we were the year prior. So understandably so. And then one of the other effects we've had is ambulance delays. So that's been a huge issue that's being dealt with county board supervisors, the TAC, the COG. We were already having ambulance delays where they're sitting in hospitals with a patient waiting to be available. And that's obviously amplified with COVID, where we're getting ambulances dispatched and our paramedics are on scene 20, 30, 45 minutes providing advanced life support until the ambulance gets there to assist us with transport. And that's the effects to the fire department and the EMS program.
All right, thanks, Grant. Do you guys have any questions or comments? David?
No.
Anything?
No.
All right. So you said 75 people or 75% of the employees?
No, about a quarter of our full staffing. Part of that was the fire season kind of laid off, and all those younger seasonal employees kind of departed. So there wasn't a good capture on those folks. Not that that won't be available to them, but they can go out elsewhere because they're technically separated. So.
Okay.
And it's anybody who wants it can go. They just go sign up and get it done. And a lot of folks are. So it's still ongoing. It's not finalized or anything.
Okay. Thanks. Good job.
I do have a question, actually.
Yep.
As a result of the the wait times for AMR,
Yes.
is there a number that or a ballpark you can give us as far as mutual aid from other cities having to come in and cover our calls while our guys are tied up on a call for service waiting for AMR to respond?
I wouldn't want to just give you a random number. We could definitely get that for you. It's still going to be a small percentage of the time because we have the 3 paramedic engines. And a lot of times we do get that just from call to call to call. So there's definitely mutual aid, and it's going to be probably ballpark. It's less than 5%, but it's 5% times 8,000 calls is a lot of calls.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. Thank you, you guys.
Mr. Preciado for just a minute.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Fermin.
Thank you, and good evenings. As council is aware, over the last several years, the Development Services Department's major goal has been to continue to maintain a high level of service to the public. At the beginning of the year, there were the 3 frozen positions in the department. And as we started the year, existing city staff were able to temporarily assume additional responsibilities that had previously been provided by those 3 frozen positions. And with city council support, consultant and other contract staff were able to also help and provide support under existing contracts that had been approved by city council. When the COVID restrictions began in March, City Hall did, as you know, close to the public, and then work shifts were staggered at City Hall, and that split the City Hall staff into 2 groups. Several changes were also made to the way that we provide services to the public. Permit applications and also plan checks were able to be submitted electronically. There was a time when any hard copy submittals were set aside and quarantined for 72 hours before they were processed by city staff. Email and phone calls became a very useful tool to replace those face-to-face meetings at the counter. And then remote access was provided to city staff. Remote computer access was provided to city staff to be able to continue to provide that service to the public when city staff was out off-site or during non-business hours. Public meetings were held, and some continue to be held using Zoom or video conferencing tools. When the COVID pandemic began, staff did recognize that there was an increase in permit activity level as well as construction. We noticed that that was picking up. At the time, there were a total of 10 public works projects that were going through construction. And actually, the number of the overall permit applications within the department increased from 675 in 2019 to over 1,000 in the year 2020. And also the planning division undertook a variety of complex advanced planning activities such as the housing element update and also the AVA implementation. And then in the middle of the pandemic, we had the El Dorado fire that started in early September. This also added other priorities to the department. As you know, that included preparing the mud or debris flow mitigation plan, also coordinating with other agencies, flood control, state and federal agencies, and property owners in the North Bench, and ultimately actually implementing or constructing some of the projects to mitigate for the potential flooding. To date, 8 full-time city employees have been off work after testing positive for COVID, and there have been a number of others who have been off work, to quarantine due to exposure to someone who tested positive. So these, the COVID-19 pandemic has presented some opportunities. I'll call them some. They have required some unique solutions from city staff to be able to address some of those impacts and also to continue to provide this service. So I know I speak for my department and maybe the entire city staff when I say thank you to the city council and also our city manager for providing staff with the resources to be able to continue to provide this service to the public.
All right, thank you, Fermin. Do you guys have any questions for staff? No, anything? No? All right, thanks, Fermin. Ray, are there any changes to the agenda before we move forward?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have no changes this evening. There are some handouts that I think the city clerk will share with you relative to public comment for specific items, but no changes to the agenda.
Okay, so that's going to take us into public comment, and I know there was a question and a concern from the last city council member in regards to public comment. So I'd like to throw it out there that if you guys would like to perhaps review and set a standard and a policy for public comment, maybe in the next couple of meetings, if you guys are okay with that?
Sure.
You okay with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Good?
I think it'd be helpful, yeah.
Okay. Ray, you have direction?
We will bring it back to you. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to public comment, I have 2 speaker slips. The first one is Al Kelly. We do have a 3-minute mark. So at 3 minutes, the light will go off.
Okay, I wanted to talk about the public trust doctrine. This has to do with the city of Yucaipa, specifically, though, my relationship with Mr. Duncan. 4 years ago, he contacted me on official business that he wanted to do something about the deaths in Yucaipa and the toxic dump. The person who he had appointed as planning commissioner Rob, hounded me to get a hold of him, and I said, well, he gave me his card, we were supposed to meet, but for 4 years, he has blown me off. The reason I talk about that is I had to go through the EPA to get a document called watermark.mark.gov, and that was produced by the EPA as mitigation that was going on at the county toxic landfill that right now is spewing 54 substances that exceed state and federal level for toxicity. The reason I'm passionate about this, I've lost 12 of my fellow colleagues that I taught with for decades at Yucaipa High School. In the last month, Pat Gorman, who was a counselor for 30 years, and Tim Best, who was only 52 years old, and he was our best drafting and engineer. They all died of brain aneurysms and complications with blastomas. Those are not common cancers. I've done research with the Cancer Registry. I've brought this up 8 times with the City Council. I've never been notified or having one response from any of you. Would you just show me is that you know damn well that you're guilty of hiding something? I've never insinuated that it's causative, but you, having not provided any response, are violating the public trust doctrine. If I don't get any satisfaction soon, I'm going to bring this up before the new Biden DOJ. Thank you.
All right, so let's move on. The next public speaker is Ariana Hun. Ariana?
Hi, this is was actually in response to item number 1 on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes, and this is a joint statement from myself and Dr. Tonda Bradshaw. We'd like to request.
Ariana, can you speak closer to the microphone?
Sure. Would you like me to repeat what I just said?
Please.
Okay. So this is specific to item number 1 in the agenda, and this is a joint statement from myself and Dr. Tonda Bradshaw. We'd like to request that the council consider and discuss several concerns having to do with the public comments portion of the last meeting on January 12th and how they are recorded in the minutes. At the last City Council meeting, Dr. Tonda Bradshaw delivered comments critical of the city's objection to COVID-related public health mandates. She read them on behalf of registered nurse Brenda Ibrahim, who was in quarantine after COVID exposure. The comments were impassioned and long, and so 2 individuals, Al Kelly and Dan Morgan, ceded their time to Mrs. Ibrahim's for her comments to be read in full. At 3 minutes for 3 people, Bradshaw, Kelly, and Morgan, this should have given Dr. Bradshaw 9 minutes to speak. However, Mayor Bowe cut her off at 6 minutes. Dr. Bradshaw objected, but she was not heard, and she was denied her right to complete her comments. In a defense of this decision, City Attorney David Snow explained to me in a letter that Mayor Bowe made a decision on that day to not allow seating, but that he used his discretion and gave Dr. Bradshaw an extra 3 minutes to speak. However, this directly contradicts the audio of that meeting, where after interrupting Tonda Bradshaw's comments and hearing her explain that she was entitled to 9 minutes, 3 for each person, Mayor Bowe said, "Thanks, Tonda, I gave you 2. Context indicates that he was referring to her own 3 minutes plus that of Al Kelly, because he says next to explain why she did not get the time of 3 people. He said, quote, "It says right here, Dan Morgan cedes to Dr. Bradshaw." Dr. Bradshaw then pointed to herself and said, "Dr. Bradshaw is right here." Mayor Bowe responded, "No, it doesn't say that." It would appear from the audio and from witnessing this encounter 2 weeks ago that Mayor Bowe cut Dr. Bradshaw off at 6 minutes, not because he decided to disallow seating at the meeting, but because he did not recognize the woman standing before him as a doctor, even as she explicitly identified herself as such. While, as City Attorney Snow also pointed out in his letter, the city's rules and procedures and the Brown Act do not explicitly state a right for speakers to cede their time from one to another. By allowing both Mr. Morgan and Mr. Kelly to stand up and state that they ceded their time, and by not informing them that they were barred from doing so, both citizens, along with Dr. Bradshaw and Mrs. Ibrahim, were disenfranchised. Denying citizens the right to be heard is a violation of the Brown Act, especially where those citizens are critical of the city's decisions. In addition to requesting that the mayor's error be reflected in the minutes, or that it be recognized in those minutes that Al Kelly and Dan Morgan were not allowed to cede their time, I would also like to request that before approving the minutes, the council take time to clarify its rules regarding seating to ensure that there is no room for accusations of favoritism, bias, or gender stereotyping in the future. particularly because.
All right,
cities-
thanks, Ariana. That was your time. Thank you. We are going to go ahead and review that in our next council meeting or, okay.
Yes.
All right. So moving right along, let's move into the consent agenda. Are there any items from the consent agenda that someone would like to remove? If not, is there a
Move to approve.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a first and a second for the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so that takes us to mayor and council member business. Before we get into the department reports, do you guys have anything? John, do you have anything?
I don't.
David?
I do not.
I do not.
No, Mr.
Justin?
Mayor.
Okay. All right, so let's go into item number 4, which is Youth Advisory Committee appointments. I believe this is Sarah.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I am here this evening as a staff liaison for the Youth Advisory Committee to recommend the appointments of Mallory Miller and Maxwell Ubilis to the committee. As you know, the committee serves as an advisory body to you, City Council, and the intent is to improve youth involvement in city issues, activities, and provide community members a roadmap for success. The Youth Advisory Committee members will continue to recruit for the at-large remaining positions. Mallory Miller and Maxwell Ubilis are being recommended for appointments to the Youth Advisory Committee for 2-year commitments effective today through September 1st, 2022. There is no fiscal impact as a result of this action. So first, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Mallory. She is currently a sophomore at Yucaipa High School and a longtime resident of Yucaipa. She has an impressive GPA and is involved in high school extracurricular activities that include being a peer mentor in the Peer Buddies program, president of the Mito Science Club, commissioner of digital productions in the Student Council, and is also on the golf team. Mallory has strong family roots in Yucaipa and is passionate about community service, especially how she can support the teen community. Her interview with the committee was quite impressive, and she provided ideas for community service projects directly in her responses. I have no doubt that she will work with the Youth Advisory Committee to advocate for the community. At this time, I invite Mallory to say a few words, after which it will be my pleasure to introduce Maxwell.
Good evening, my name is Mallory Miller, and I have lived in Yucaipa all of my life. I enjoy playing golf as well as playing pickleball and going on hikes with my family. I have always been eager to do community service, even at an early age. My middle and elementary schools required all students to have 10 to 15 hours of community service per year, and then we presented to our teachers and classmates about our service. For many years, my brother and I did a food drive in our neighborhood. Each year, we would walk up and down the street many Saturdays in a row, passing out flyers. Then, on other days, we would bring our wagon to collect the food donations. After all the collection was over, we would load up the car with the help of my parents, and we would drive the food over to Yucaipa Family Assistance. There, we would unload the donations, as well as organizing other things and completing various tasks around the store. Last week, I was able to volunteer alongside Max at our city's USDA distribution at the Shear Community Center. I helped handing out food there helped me remember how amazing I felt after I helped in my family's food drive. I know that my passion for my community will never go away. My main goal for applying for the Youth Advisory Committee is to give back to the community that has given so much to me. I am confident that being a member of the committee will teach me how to serve in various leadership positions, as well as to handle stressful situations, as I am planning on being a biogeochemical engineer in the future. I greatly appreciate this opportunity, as well as your time, and I hope that you will consider me for the Yucaipa Youth Advisory.
Great job. One thing you forgot there is I know her parents, and they're pretty cool also. They're back there.
I was leaving that to Miss Mallory, so we'll butter you up next time.
Welcome.
So, Next, and certainly not to be outdone, I introduce Maxwell, also known as Max. He is currently a freshman at Yucaipa High School, and despite his first high school term completed via distance learning, he has an outstanding GPA with a challenging course load that includes many honors classes. In his resume, Max describes himself as responsible, tenacious, and goal-oriented. Meeting Max during his committee interview, he displayed those inspiring qualities and then some. Furthermore, he was the first to volunteer to assist the city's USDA distribution that Mallory mentioned last week at the Shear Community Center, which helped to provide meals to more than 130 local seniors and families. And the committee is also encouraged to continue to support this program. Max's desire to positively contribute to the community is much appreciated and will be an asset to the Youth Advisory Committee. At this time, I invite Max to say a few words, after which we'll conclude our presentation. Staff are available for questions.
First of all, I would like to give thanks to the members of the Youth Committee, the members of the City Council, and Ms. Martinez for putting in the time and effort to consider me as one of the next members of the Youth Advisory Committee. I am extremely grateful and privileged to live in a town where its public officials truly care about its youth. With our youth being stuck at home with little to no social interaction with their peers, added on to other issues that already plagued our youth, such as mental health, vaping, and cyberbullying, the youth of Yucaipa need our help more than ever. You all have given us the chance to be in a position where we can change the quality of life among our youth, and that is something that no virus can take away from us. I'm ecstatic to have an opportunity to change my community through this committee. Thank you.
Great job, Max. I'm sure you have cool parents too, right? We would like to have our pictures taken with you before you go. Is that okay?
Yeah, you'll have to move approval and after you get done.
You guys can come down here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion that we accept Mallory and Max for Youth Advisory Committee?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I'll second.
Oh,
We already did that.
we already have a second, so we're good. So we have first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, welcome you two. Awesome. All right, so that takes us to item number 5, and I believe that is Jennifer?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. This item pertains to council committee terms. As we recently discovered this past December, we had 2 council members that left office, which created a gap in service, especially for the Finance Committee. So before you this evening are recommended resolutions 2021-01, 02, and 03, which will address immediately appointment in the event of vacancy due to a council member leaving office. That's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
All right, are there any questions for staff?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, so 5-0. So that takes us to possible action on pending legislation, and I see that we have an item here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. wanted to take this opportunity to share a couple of pieces of legislation that are kind of early in the process. We were able to hear about these two pieces of legislation in the League of Cities Housing and Economic Development Committee that I am part of. And the committee took an action, I'll talk about in a minute, for SB 6, did not take an action relative to SB 9. But as they continue to work through the process, and the staff at the League of Cities certainly believes that these two bills will have legs and get fairly far along in the process, if not all the way through the process. It would be helpful, I think, for staff to get direction from council in how to move forward. We have a follow-up League of Cities special meeting, Housing and Economic Development Committee special meeting for SB 9 because we didn't get to that item, ran out of time. But as I said, they did take an action. The committee, we took an action on SB 6. So SB 6 was put forth by Senator Caballero, characterized as a local planning, housing, and commercial zone. Of course, SB 9 was put forward by Senator Atkins. SB 6 is basically, again, because these are early, there may be some changes along the way, so I'm going to give you the kind of the cliff notes, if you will, of the two pieces of legislation, as the details may change along the way. But SB 6 is intended to create what they characterize as a Neighborhood Homes Act, which establishes a housing development project as an authorized use on a neighborhood lot defined as a lot zoned for office or retail commercial that is not adjacent to the industrial use. So as you may recall, this was one of the alternatives, the reuse of commercially zoned property for residential in the housing element discussion. But essentially, this would pre-zone commercial property under certain circumstances, specifically that it's not left or adjacent to an industrial use, such that a project proponent could process the project as though it met, a residential project, as though it met the zoning requirements in the community for residentially zoned property. And so it takes that first level of approval out of the hands of the Planning Commission and then ultimately the City Council. It allows the body, Planning Commission and City Council, to review projects consistent with the citywide design guidelines, other parking requirements, et cetera, but it takes away that first approval, which is discretionary at this point, depending on where council wishes to go with the housing element. But as it sits today, that rezoning of commercial property for residential is purely a discretionary action by the City Council. There are other elements associated with this which make it more difficult for projects to get built, like it requires prevailing wages. It also requires a certain percentage of the units be affordable housing units. And so, of course, those create challenges for a project proponent by themselves. But that does change that first step in the process, that rezoning of property. Happy to try to answer any questions you may have. The decision by the League of Cities Housing and Economic Development Committee, and the way that works is they make a recommendation ultimately to the League Board, but because these were considered so early in the process, essentially SB 6, for SB 6, the committee gave staff direction to continue to work on the bill and see if there are ways to make it more palatable. Instead of a requirement that cities have to rezone the commercial properties in those circumstances to residential, perhaps it's more of a incentive-based program. And then the prevailing wages, of course, is a huge issue, and perhaps that's something that should be deleted from the bill as well. And so the direction that was given staff is work on it, bring it back in its updated form, and see what kind of progress is made, and then the committee would make a recommendation to the full board, and then that's when you would normally see that recommendation from League of Cities, and then have another opportunity to take a position on such a bill. So seeking direction from you relative to further comment to the League of Cities Housing and Economic Development Committee Board, or committee, I should say, and/or if you're prepared to make recommendation or give us direction to make recommendations to the maker of the bill now, we can certainly do that as well on this one. Before I go on to the next one, perhaps I will give you the opportunity to.
All right, so are there any questions in regarding to SB 6?
I have one real fast. I don't know if I can word this correctly, but what it says basically is that you can put residential in a commercial, such as something that's viewed going to be a Target shopping center or something like that. You can put commercial in there as long as it's not adjacent to industrial, which is something we don't have. Where in our community would that scenario affect us?
So I touched on it briefly at the beginning of the presentation. One of the alternatives that you, as a council, kicked around a little bit in the housing element discussion and gave staff some direction was on the transportation corridor along Yucaipa Boulevard. There may be locations where at some point, and it's true that more and more folks are buying things via internet, online, as opposed to bricks and mortar commercial sites. And so certainly that part of it is true. But what this would do would say, and one of the examples more recently is the project in the 99-cent store center, the Queen Bean Center that was recently approved as a senior housing project. That was approved and rezoned on a commercially zoned property. And so maybe that's the best example. What this, at least in the current form, what this legislation would do is take away that rezone process. It would simply be that the Planning Commission and Council would review the project proposal, in that case, senior family, senior affordable housing, not affordable, I'm sorry, senior multifamily project. Review that in the context of the city's design guidelines, parking requirements, et cetera, but not have the ability to turn it down just because it's zoned commercial and you'd rather keep it commercial, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then there's other restrictions too, as noted in the bill itself, such as high fire area. Now, we have a lot of open land and some commercially zoned lands, especially in the area of Bryant and Oakland Road. So in theory, that, a developer can come in and do that. However, if I'm not mistaken, and what is that land? Is that considered a hazardous fire area?
I don't have the map for the hazardous fire area memorized. I would guess that it's a further away from that intersection, but Grant may know, but I don't have it memorized. I'm sorry. I'd have to check into that and get back to you.
Okay. No, just that, I'd like to see commercial go there in that one northeast corner rather than residential. And I don't know if anybody in the audience might have some firsthand information.
All right.
Wait, maybe Chief Malinowski, he's in the audience, he might know.
Yeah, maybe he does.
Without pulling a map out, I'm pretty confident that's going to be high fire hazard severity zone. It won't be very high fire hazard severity zone. That's more pushed on more to the foothills, but yeah, it'd be that yellow kind of second tier high fire hazard. So it wouldn't be subject to like the state land use planning like very high fire hazard would. So.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, Fermin pulled up the map and confirmed as Mr. Malinowski was saying that. So he's absolutely right.
Got to be right one today, right?
Thank you.
So Ray, let's take into consideration that property next to the 99-cent store. If that were to be changed under this law, they would automatically get their zoning as wished, but then they would be required to build it with prevailing wage?
Correct.
So basically, then it wouldn't be affordable to build.
That is true, if they
I mean, that's really
implement
what
it
they're
pursuant to
saying.
this law.
Yeah, this is one of those bills, I actually had to read it like 10 times just because it's one of the hardest things I've ever, it's the most convoluted thing I've ever read. Anyway, but I did notice this, it just seems like another bill to take away rights that the cities have, and it's just taking more local authority away and giving it to the state.
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I read it as, so. But then again, once I said, I read it 10 times, and it's a tough one to read.
Any clearer, is it?
No, it's about as clear as mud.
I
All right.
think, I'd like to just renew what I said at the last meeting, and I'm gonna probably say this as often as the RENA comes before this council. I'm not convinced that there is a housing shortage, considering we're on the verge of losing an electoral vote for the first time in the state's history, and to consider the state mandating we change the way we do business, bearing in mind that we know what's best for the community, because we are the community, from somebody who sits lofty on a perch in Sacramento is disturbing to me. So I would, as it says in the agenda, to seek direction from the council, it would be to renew any type of objections to this because of that. I think the state should have to present a compelling argument as to why we need to do this, and I think they've failed to do so at this point.
All right, so Bob, do you have something?
So the whole goal with the state government, the governor and the Senate and the Assembly, is to basically take away our rights to zone. This bill is called Local Planning, Housing and Commercial Zones. Are we talking, what we talked about at the last meeting was we're trying to get out in front of this and sort of set this up so that they don't come in and take away our jurisdiction, or that's the whole goal. But we know they're going to, no matter what we do, we know that they're going to take it away eventually. That seems to be the goal.
Well, just for the record, we actually have shot down the League of Cities, and all the cities together have shot down a number of the housing bills that have come out of the legislature over the last couple of years. So I'm sure they're going to keep pushing it, but we can push back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The league and the cities together have been successful. And the previous derivation of each of these bills was shut down last year, as you said, with that effort. And I guess I would just like to point out one other thing. The committee did talk a lot about that relative to cities that have approved housing elements. If a city has done the things that they need to do to have an approved housing element, then they've demonstrated they don't need this kind of oversight from the state, this kind of take away of local control from the state. So that was, in fact, one of the things that the committee recommended that staff talk to the maker of the bill about.
So Ray, that's going to apply to SB 9 at the same?
Yeah.
I mean, they're both kind of taking away local authority from what I understand.
Absolutely. If I may, just briefly, I think I'll hear the same thing, but concurrence that we would get back to the League of City Staff and say we absolutely do not like this bill the way it's drafted. Is that,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
SB 9, maybe even more so. It is, like I said earlier, just a minute ago, it's a further derivation of a bill that, I don't remember the number, but that was considered last year, and it was making some progress. It got dropped at an inopportune time as part of the reason that it probably didn't go any further. But on the face of it, it sounds even more, taking more of a take away of local control, I guess is what I'm saying. In that, last year, it provided for a developer or builder to be allowed to put a fourplex on a vacant parcel in any residential zone property in your community, in our community, without any approval required from City Council or Planning Commission, other than the normal architecture review. And so for those lots, general plan lots, vacant lots that are out there, somebody could basically come in and build fourplexes on those lots. This year, the SB9 version's been changed so that it's a duplex and not a fourplex. Also, it adds the ministerial approval for urban lot splits, so that would be done administratively as well. And an urban, definition of urban is any, we're urban, a city of 50,000 people is urban, so, by their definition. So, again, that is a takeaway, certainly a takeaway of local control, and happy to take the same message back to the League of City staff if that's the concurrence of the council this evening.
Yep, my opinion's the same, so.
Absolutely.
Bob?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. So that takes us to department reports. Number 7, the city logo. Is this Megan?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I am here this evening with the Marketing Committee. We are asking that City Council review and approve a City of Yucaipa logo. On January 11th, the committee came before you with a study session to discuss a proposed logo update. The study session included discussing the limitations of the current logo and the review of a new proposed logo. Following the study session, council directed staff to return to council at a later date with 2 options for a proposed logo. If I may direct your attention to the screen, the first option was to vectorize the current logo, and as you can see, the lines are a lot crisper, and that has been completed. And the second option was to make Mount San Bernardino a more prominent feature in the proposed logo presented on January 11th. Margot will speak later about this design and the changes made. I would like to pass the presentation at this time to Caroline to discuss how the city logo affects her area of responsibility within the city.
Thank you, Megan. So as she said, over the past several weeks, the marketing team has been working really hard to incorporate council's feedback. As a tool, a new logo coupled with a comprehensive branding effort is effective in marketing the city within the community and to external stakeholders such as developers, investors, and those looking to do business in the city. The proposed logo and branding board is eye-catching and versatile that can be adjusted for different needs and various media platforms. The proposed branding board complements the proposed logo and ensures the city's output and collateral, such as banners, flyers, social media, the website, and other marketing material, is professional and consistent. In addition, staff has spoken to other staff from other cities that have also adopted a new logo, and their comments speak to the benefits a new logo can bring to marketing efforts, specifically with regard to digital marketing and economic development that aligns with the city's goals and priorities and attracts desirable retail opportunities. As you know, Yucaipa must compete with neighboring cities in the region for businesses, for investors, site selectors, and executives that represent businesses and corporations, some of which spend millions of dollars in their own marketing and branding, who are looking to Yucaipa to expand. It is important that the city's logo signify a place that is also modern, cutting edge, and open for business. It helps to ensure Yucaipa remains competitive in attracting commercial businesses that will contribute to the city's economic vitality and growth. One city shared a 60% increase in development since the adoption and rollout of their logo, which really speaks to how a new logo or how a logo can help a city's economic development efforts. Staff believes the proposed logo is modern and professional, but keeps elements of the existing logo in place. Most importantly, it is an effective tool to engage with the community and can significantly enhance digital marketing and economic development marketing efforts. To speak more about the changes that have been made since the study session, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and fellow member of the marketing team, Margot Mullen.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I am here tonight to share with you the modifications that were suggested from our last meeting. I know we can all agree on one thing, that the mountain views are undoubtedly a monumental part of Yucaipa. As someone who has had the opportunity to travel to different parts of the world and to connect with people to specifically work on projects to create works of art that represent that particular community, I understand the value that landmarks and landscapes have and the great significance they hold within those communities. Every individual that lives in a space that is as beautiful as Yucaipa has a form of pride and love to their area. Our team has communicated at great lengths about the mountain range. If I can bring your attention to the screen, you will see a 3D map of the city of Yucaipa. Using this map gives us the opportunity to view the mountains from the city and shows the different views from varying community perspectives. The other point our team can all agree on is that depending on where you live, work, hike, or bike in Yucaipa, these iconic mountain views are always changing. This logo is a visual representation of the Yucaipa region, and it is through the marketing team's comprehensive branding strategy that you will feel the excitement to explore our many parks and connect with community through our many festivals and free events. If we look up at the screen, we will see the changes that occurred from the feedback. So over here on the left side, you'll see that I had removed the established portion of the design to create a cleaner and less cluttered logo. There are 2 fonts in this logo. I created the larger mountain to look more dominant in the proposed logo and to better reflect the large-scale presence San Bernardino Mountain has in Yucaipa's visual landscape. Thank you so much for your feedback, and I hope that as you review the changes, you will see your suggestions directly represented in this modified proposed logo. I now turn the presentation over to Megan.
In addition, staff is currently researching the process to copyright the city logo. If directed, staff will proceed with the copyright process and have it completed within the year. The marketing team is available to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
All right, so I like what you did. Are there any other questions or comments or so forth? John, do you have anything?
No, no.
David?
I'm going to say it looks a lot better than, the second version here looks a lot better than the first version, and you guys are wearing me down. So that's good. I can accept it.
All right. Bob? You want to go to Justin first?
Yeah.
Justin. Come on, Justin.
Oh, he needs more time, okay. Yeah. Okay, I'll give him more time. It's definitely different. It's definitely higher. It's really hard for me to let go of the old logo, but
This is in addition to, right? We
So our goal would be to implement this logo across all of our digital platforms as well. However, moving forward with any type of landmark designs or landscape design, City Council does have the right to choose which design we move forward with, so.
Okay. That's the only question I have, so. All right, so Justin, comes back to you.
All right, back to the Justin show. I didn't see it at first when I picked up my packet here. It looked like the same logo to me. I see it side by side. I do see that there's a notable difference to the peak of Mount San Bernardino in the new logo. So I left the council meeting 2 weeks ago, and I have had this discussion a plethora of times with people who I consider to be pillars of our community. I think Councilman Avila made a phenomenal point when he noted the font of the word Yucaipa in the pre-existing logo, and it being possibly psychological and uplifting. That and I never noted that before, and maybe call me biased because I'm a lifelong son of the city, but there is something about this logo that is, to me, warmer than that. I get, and I don't mean to offend, I get a clip art vibe from that. I get like a Windows 95 clip art vibe. It's when I looked at it from, you had Beaumont, Menifee, and South Lake Tahoe, and I saw their previous city logos, and they looked antiquated. They looked like they needed to be rejuvenated. I think they did a good job in their new ones. And then I see this, and I don't see antiquated in here. I see something that is very viable and marketable. But I will concede with city staff, you are the experts in marketing, I'm not. If you tell me that this is going to be very difficult for you to market our city, and that will be extraordinarily easier, and we can anticipate potentially seeing a 60% growth in our economic development, I will concede to the numbers, because I'll go off that. But I just want to say this is warming and inviting to me. Maybe, like I said, I'm biased, but I think you did a better job bringing out the peaks that I referenced last time. With that, I'll concede.
You know, a while back, I had to take a vote, and I took a reluctant yes vote, so there's always a possibility.
Mr. Mayor.
All right, so anything else? John?
Yes, I wanted to wait to the end because I didn't want to taint the opinion first. And honestly, when I look at it, I have to say that I think the old logo states simplicity. And when talking to some folks with marketing and whatnot, a more can be said with simple sometimes. And so I personally, I see the adjustments and I think it looks better, but I still, if I had to vote right now, I would say no. Because I like the old logo because I think it's more simplistic. The more we put in there, the more we do, I think it kind of detracts from it. And then moving forward, whatever we do for a logo, I still think we need to figure out what our identity is for a logo. And whatever that is, whether it's digital, on the vehicles, on our signs, it needs to be the same. Not an Explorer, Yucaipa logo, not our old one, and this one. Because I think then it makes it look like we don't know what our identity is, and we confuse the public.
May I ask
All right.
a question now?
Go ahead,
too?
David.
With respect to the old logo, are we going to keep that at all, or is like, and this is just for marketing purposes? And I asked this question because as I was driving down the street with the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, she was.
You have your mask on?
No disclosure?
She was, she loves this, by the way. She would like to see California on the bottom because that's the marketing. Now, she loves that. But I was pointing out that our street signs have the old logo, our flag has the old logo, our brass plaques have the old logo, and there's so many of the the existing logo that, my question is are we going to keep that as a symbol, but the marketing tools will be this variety?
I think
Because we've got so many, how much is it going to cost to change everything back, to the new style? You got to think about that too.
I know Mary had mentioned in her report that landmarks and logos of landmarks and so forth that's up to us. We can just keep the old logo.
Okay, and I wasn't clear about that. I must have spaced out because our vehicles still show that too, and it'd be very expensive to change out. But if this is going to be the marketing image that we want to project, again, I can live with that.
So, if I may.
Right, so go ahead, Ray.
I was just going to say that there have been several statements made that kind of are related to each other. One, and as you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, Mary answered the question about we're able to keep the existing bridge emblems the same and monuments the same and move on in the future at the council's discretion about what to put on new monuments and new bridges and et cetera. But I do think that there does have to be an investment in branding if the city is going to really take it seriously. There will be an investment in branding and marketing and all of that, whether it's, with the existing logo or with a new logo. And you make a good point, Council Member, that Thorpe, that that we have a different brand, if you will, for the YPAC, Explore Yucaipa. And that is a decision that was made a few years ago in an effort to kind of take us in a little different direction in the Uptown with the YPAC. And so that that thought process we've been through in terms of rebranding the YPAC and rebranding in general. What we didn't take along at that time was the pre-existing, the currently existing logo. And so certainly there are advantages to having a vectorized version, and you see a more clean version of the current logo because we vectorized it between the last, that's a word I learned, by the way, from the last meeting to now. And so I think that's helpful. But I think what staff has been relaying is a kind of a new identity in terms of branding ourselves. If you go back in history, there was not much interest in branding the community in general. In fact, we were the community that sent some commercial developments off to other communities. We were not real interested in inviting that kind of commercial development to Yucaipa or other types of development to Yucaipa. And that has evolved in recent years, and we've seen some of the results of that and some of the development that's occurred. But I think the branding, consistent branding, and perhaps a little bit more modern branding is something that staff felt very strongly about in terms of moving us in that direction. So I think that was a part of it that the city has evolved, the community has evolved over years to say, we don't want that kind of development to the point where maybe we do want some commercial development that makes sense, that's quality development. And if we do, then maybe that more proactive and targeted approach to marketing through branding and maybe a more modernized branding is something that we ought to consider. So.
All right, so at this point, we need to, well, I guess we could just take a vote.
I'd like to say something. So are we assuming that we haven't been branded, that this logo, this older logo, didn't brand us? I understand the stigma.
I'm sorry?
I understand the stigma that Yucaipa has not been a pro-growth city for a long time. And on one hand, I really like that. On the other hand, I don't, because I think there's some things we need for the convenience of the people that live here as far as shopping. But I don't want to assume that we haven't been branded.
It's certainly a type of branding, absolutely. Is it the reinvigorated approach? Is that the right word? That Councilmember Beaver referenced earlier from the other communities.
Rejuvenized.
Thank you. I don't know. That's certainly for you folks to decide. It may be that branding in your minds is perfectly fine with that current logo, but that was the intent of the other communities that were referenced this evening, and I think that was part of the intent of staff. So.
And if I may just add to what City Manager Casey said, we don't have a branding board with the current logo. There are all these different ways that you use logo because things have changed so much throughout the years, and now we do utilize social media and we market through the website and digitally. And this branding board that was also passed out to you guys at the January 11th meeting helps us to brand our city, to make sure the city website is using the same colors that are in our logo, to make sure that our Facebook page uses photos that go with our mood board. It's all part of the process of putting a whole package together and sticking to that package. And finally, with the copyright process, that is definitely something that we need to do, because you see the city logo used all throughout the city on different businesses. And while we love that they use that, there is, rules that have to be followed. If anybody uses our logo, permission has to be asked from us first to make sure that they don't stretch it or use it in a way that it shouldn't be used.
Megan, I know of one business. Do you know of more? Toscano's has our images on their
Yeah, there's a couple. There's I think at least 3 that we knew of that we saw the image on their logo.
All right. Any more input?
Is there a way that maybe, not to stall this out and drag things out, but to take elements of this, maybe elements of the other one, and come up with a whole different logo to consider, rather than just doing minor tweaks to this one? I say minor, it may not have been minor, but to have a different look, maybe different consideration?
We can definitely go back to the, quote unquote drawing board and incorporate that. However, this peak, as you will see here, is actually an outline of the classic logo. So yeah, let me show you right here. So the peak on the left-hand side is actually drawn here at the top of the peak on this logo here. This logo, the classic logo, part of the reason why we did start this process was it was created prior to our social media, and this is just kind of going on, but it wasn't created to be a circular logo, so it won't fit in some of our platforms, and then of course with everything with our branding board, but I won't go on. But yes, if it is the direction of council to come back at another council date with a different logo than it was presented tonight, we can definitely do that.
That's all I have.
Well, my position, I think it looks fine. I do want to keep the old logo for landmarks. That's really what the only thing I have. I understand that you have to change the logo for other reasons. With that, is there a motion to accept, or? I'll put out I'll ask for a motion to accept what's here first, and then if not, we can maybe push it to another council meeting with different changes.
I'd like to get this off our plate, and if we're going to keep the original logo for our landmarks, and we don't, do the expense of changing out all the city vehicles, including police and fire and all these other things, and not have to spend, thousands and thousands of dollars to change our street signs. I'm willing to accept this as a marketing, as long as we get to keep our traditional or historic symbol of Yucaipa in all of our major entities, such as the plaques and the signage and our flag.
Yeah, but that kind of kills the whole idea of a fresh new look, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying, and I agree that it's going to cost some money to change all the decals and logos and even our signs at Oakland Road, or Oakland off-ramp there by Pumpkin Patch, those signs that we've built that.
Yeah, all that,
Right.
that's a lot of
It's
money.
everywhere, yeah.
I thought that was branding. I thought we were branding.
All right, so is there a motion to accept?
I moved for that.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have a second. I'll second. Can I second? All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
No.
A no for me.
All right, so we lost 3-2. So would we prefer to look at it again further and come back later?
I'm good with that.
Or do you want to just,
I'm
you
good with
just want to
that.
stick it out with the old one, the old logo?
I say we look at another option, personally.
Okay,
So that's my motion.
that's your motion. Is there a second to John's motion?
I didn't hear what he said.
Go ahead.
To consider another option for a logo between this one and the historic one. See if they can come up with a third option, I guess is what I'm looking for, that might implement aspects from either one of these two.
I'll second it if city staff insists that it's absolutely necessary to do. If it's not necessary, I say we stay where what we have. The city of Yucaipa is known as the city of Yucaipa, and we are the gem of the Inland Empire for a reason. Changes should be responsible, but only those that are necessary and not impulsive, if that's the right word. I don't think we need to change. I think we're perfect just the way we are. We need to be open to the ideas that we can improve, but changing us and rebranding us is not necessary, in my opinion.
All right, so we have a motion on the table for just coming back with a different logo, a third option. So did we have it, did you second, Justin, or did you not?
I'd like to see us take this logo here and on the color board, put this at the top, add some color to it, but maintain the same shape and the same colors, but maybe add some brown. Maybe the city of, widen that. I don't really want this California on there because I'm disgusted with the state of California. I really don't want that on there. I'd rather just say just Yucaipa, but that's just my opinion.
All right, so
Well, we can.
there was no second to your
We can
motion,
put
John.
Nevada on if
unfortunately.
you want.
So as of right now, we don't have, there's no action taken. So what do we do at this point? Dave? What's that?
Yeah, well, Mr. Mayor, that it can be the end of the discussion, and we just stay the course with the logo that we have, or there could be further direction that the council might want to give to staff to come back with any other options that might be of interest to the council.
Well, the only issue I have is I don't want our staff to keep spending time on logos if we're just going to stick with the old one. So if we're not going to accept this one, let's just stick with the old logo. That does cost time and staff time. And
I'll second that.
so we're sticking out with the old logo.
I'd say so.
What's
It sounds
that?
like our constituents in the audience agree.
Do I need to take an action on that, or we just, well, because
Yeah,
there
it'd
was
be
no,
helpful,
there
yeah.
was no action, and we were actually defaulting back to the original logo.
Yeah,
So, moving on to the next item?
That's fine.
Okay,
I think we got clear direction.
all right. So the next item is item number 8. I believe this is Caroline.
Good evening again, Mayor Bogue and City Council members. For your consideration this evening is the submittal of an application to the County of San Bernardino requesting Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus, also known as CDBG CV3 funds, to implement a utility and rental mortgage assistance grant program. Like recent rounds of CDBG coronavirus funding, this third round is made possible by the CARES Act, passed by the federal government to allocate funding for agencies to use for the prevention of, preparation for, and response to COVID-19. As an entitlement city and through a cooperative agreement, the city partners with the County of San Bernardino to administer its CDBG funds, and as such must apply to the county for the allocated funding. As you may recall, the city has applied for and utilized a previous round of CDBG funding. On May 27, 2020, the city submitted an application to the county, and on October 12, 2020, Council approved the use of the funds to implement a COVID-19 related small business assistance loan to grant program. The most recent notice of funding availability for this third round was released on December 14, 2020. Under this round of funding, the city's CDBG CV3 estimated allocation is $210,786 with a deadline of January 28, 2021 to apply. If approved, staff proposes using the funding to develop, implement, and administer a utility and/or mortgage rental assistance program for residents. The proposed program will aim to assist at least 25 low to moderate income households in Yucaipa. As staff contemplated programs, we did want to note that we also considered a utility and mortgage rental assistance program for commercial businesses. However, based on discussions with county staff, such a program serving only businesses would not be eligible due to not meeting the national objectives of CDBG, specifically in preventing or responding to the spread of COVID-19 and serving populations who are primarily of low to moderate income. It is important to distinguish that the city's COVID-19 Small Business Loan to Grant program targeting businesses was approved by the county for CDBG funding due to the program requirement of businesses retaining a low to moderate income employee for 6 months. So county staff was able to make that connection that low to moderate income persons were being served due to that program component. In addition to the $210,786 that has been allocated to the city under CDBG C3, the city has approximately $147,000 in unused CV1 funds. This is the funding that we use to implement the loan to grant program. There have been no other applicants to this program, which staff has promoted extensively through the website and social media channels. Therefore, the remaining funding can be applied towards the proposed utility and rental mortgage assistance program. The available funds from the Small Business Assistance Program, coupled with the CDBG CV3 funds allocated to the city, bring a total funding for the proposed program to $357,786. The funds will be used to cover program costs as well as personnel costs in administering the program. If approved, staff will initiate program funding through an amendment in the fiscal year 2020-2021 annual budget in the CDBG fund to include an allocation for revenues and expenditures related to the proposed program in the amount of $210,786. To include the $147,000 in unused CV1 funds, staff will make the necessary budget adjustments to transfer the unused funds into the new budget for the proposed rental and utility program. As is typical with CDBG funding, the city will request reimbursement for funds from the county after implementation. The impact to the general fund consists of upfront costs as it is a reimbursement. So there will be no net impact to the general fund as a result of this item, as all costs associated will be reimbursed to the city by the county. This concludes my report on this item. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Okay, so are there any questions for Caroline or staff?
So this money, this program is designed to help low-income families pay their rent or their mortgage and their utilities?
We are proposing that nationally, the objective of CDBG funds is to serve low to moderate income populations. And through this, that is exactly what we're proposing to do with the funds if approved.
So you stated in your presentation that you anticipate, or this could assist 25 households. That's an estimate. That's just the amount we have divided by 25. That's where we got that number.
Yes, at least.
Do we have any, the last program we did had a remainder of approximately 140,000 because there wasn't an interest or people didn't want to go jump through the hoops to get it. I would suggest city staff look into being prepared should that happen again. And should we find ourselves with a lack of applications from the low-end households or whomever qualifies. And then it would be my suggestion and hopes that for those businesses who have taken advantage of this grant to loan, should the money still be there, and according to your presentation, we have till May 31st, 2022 to spend this, instead of letting it potentially die, offering like a second helpings for those who have already taken advantage of this grant to loan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear? Makes sense.
So if I may, there's also potential perhaps to give businesses one last chance that haven't applied, give them a couple weeks or something like that. We do have some time, but as Caroline mentioned, there are some criteria for the small business loan, the grant program, that we have to meet, and we are, as a city, upfronting those costs. So there's a little bit of a, challenge there in terms of upfronting those costs and making sure that businesses meet those criteria. So I don't want to give them too much time perhaps, but if we gave businesses, say, another couple of weeks, and this is the hard and fast deadline, if you don't submit and get all of the paperwork done, and Caroline is very good at helping with the paperwork, in that 2-week period, we've done everything we can for small businesses in this program. Maybe then another week or two after that, if Caroline, I don't know if existing businesses, I assume they can be eligible because to have an additional loan to grant stipend, if you will, or allocation is a better word, given that the $10,000 cap per application, I think, was something that we did just to make sure that we spread it around as best we could. So I think what you're requesting is certainly can be done, and perhaps we give all businesses a couple of weeks to submit, and then if nobody submits, a couple more weeks or another week for those that have been successful in submitting an application to ask for additional funding. And then after that, whatever's left over, move over to this other program. If that seems like it might be the right course of action, maybe that's something council can, either suggest other changes that you all look at, or maybe that's a direction that is a little bit of a derivation of your suggestions.
Does that work for you, Councilmember Beaver?
Yeah, I don't want to take away from I think the importance, and I recognize that giving this, fighting for this to also go to households aside from just businesses is important. So I would agree, maybe give the small businesses, 2 weeks would be, I think, the end of business on Friday, February 5th would be a good time for them to apply for it. And should they not, move forward with the next part of it, which is this application. But what I wanted to go back to is, should we find ourselves in a similar position, I think we should give both also the households a deadline as well. And if they don't meet it by then and we find ourselves with a surplus of monies, giving those businesses who have already received the $10,000, I think there's 4 of them in our city,
Yes,
a chance
yes.
for a quote unquote second helping. We have the money, and if we're able to help the ones who are willing to ask for it or put in the work for it, I think we should do that.
Yes, we'll be developing, as we fine tune the program more, if approved, then we'll need to actually develop some internal deadlines. So there will be a time frame for them.
Yeah, the only request that I have is that we maybe a few months before the deadline ends, that if there's money left over, that we can figure out what to do with it. So Justin, was that a motion that you made over there?
It was.
Do we have a second, or do you have anything to say,
No,
David?
no, I get it, no.
I'm good.
John? So we have a motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, thank you much.
Carolyn, thank you for your hard work on this.
All right, so that takes us to item number 9, Music and Arts Festival. Is this Mary?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. On January 11th, City Council approved the city manager to execute a contract with Harbor Productions for the Music and Arts Festival headline entertainment. City staff reached out to Harbor Productions to confirm that the deposit for the entertainment was refundable should the event be canceled due to COVID-19. During negotiations, we were informed that a refundable deposit was not an option. However, the artist was willing to schedule a postponement date. City staff is recommending moving forward with the headliners and requesting a potential second date for Low Cash and Temecula Road to play at the annual Autumn Fest, which is scheduled for Friday and Saturday. The date for the headline entertainment would be Saturday, October 9th, 2021. If the 2021 YMAF is canceled, staff would recommend an encumbrance in the amount of $22,550 be moved from fiscal year 2021, 2022 to cover the move to fiscal year 2021, 2022 to cover the remaining balance of the headlight entertainment for the 2021 Autumn Fest. That concludes my report, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
So any questions for Mary or staff?
No?
Have we given any thought to the fact that instead of having, I mean, obviously, we're planning to have the music and arts May. How about let's do July or August if the ridiculous government that we live under will not allow us to get together? Instead of going to Autumn Fest with this second option of the date, have we thought about maybe having the Music and Arts Festival in July or June, or, I mean, whatever day they're going to go ahead and let us get together, let's just move the music and arts to that day and then proceed from there. Just a thought.
Yeah, we're happy to take it year by year we have reached out to Harbor Productions, and they did explain to us, of course, if some events like Stagecoach, which Locash is playing at for the end of April 2021, if Stagecoach reschedules to October like they did in the previous year, then we may have some scheduling conflicts with Locash for the event in October. So it would definitely be an option to recontact Locash and see if they're available for a summer festival of the sort. But we would definitely be coming back to council with approval for that event.
Okay,
I'll move approval of this item.
okay.
I'll
So
second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. So that takes us to, thank you, Mary. That takes us to item number 10. I believe this is Ben.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. Before you is a time extension, or a 2-year time extension for tentative track map 19900. This project itself was originally approved by the City Council on December 17th, 2014, and consisted of 18 single-family lots on approximately 5 acres. In conjunction with the city's approval timeline and the state extensions, the original expiration date for the project was January 22nd, 2018. And then subsequent that the applicant did submit their first time extension timely, and which approved a 36-month time extension, rendering the ultimate approval date or expiration date of January 22nd, 2021. Pursuant to our development code, a final 2-year time extension is permitted, and on December 15th, 2020, the applicant did submit the final extension request, which does require City Council approval, which is why this project is before you tonight. Similar to other extension requests, staff does review the project and conditions to make any amendments necessary to the conditions of approval to make sure that they're consistent with today's requirements, or at least up to date with the city's standard language. However, no changes to the actual project are proposed, and no changes to the site have occurred that would modify the prior analysis for the project or the environmental clearance that previously was approved. And so with that, staff does recommend approval of the final 2-year extension, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, so are there any questions for staff? David? Oh.
Do you have any questions over there?
I was going to move approval.
I have a question. So they've exhausted all of the state extensions, state allowed extensions, and this is the last extension that they'll be given?
So the state extensions itself just were automatic, and essentially through kind of the Great Recession, there was a number of different bills that resulted in a total of 7 years of possible extensions. This project being approved kind of towards the end, I think only qualified for one of the state law extensions that was granted kind of throughout that Great Recession period. So they have exhausted that remaining state extension, our city development code, the first 3-year extension, and then this is the final one that's
Okay,
given.
so any more extensions, will any more extensions be allowed should they use up this extension?
No other extensions would be permitted. Essentially, they would have to refile the tentative map to revive that project after that period.
Okay. Now, one of the observations here is that the applicant said that the current extension is necessary due to market conditions which have delayed the efforts to complete the recordation process. The market is really hot right now. I'm just a little surprised.
Well, I know they gave us, the state gave us a number of extensions when the market crashed, and it sounds to me like they're just kind of continuing with the same extension process maybe, of maybe 2012 or so.
This one is just the development code. I think the person that owned it was just someone that has property, but they're not necessarily a home builder. And so I think part of the market conditions is they've been trying to find a home builder that would take on the 18-unit project.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Dave, anything else? John?
No, sir.
David, you're good?
I'm good.
You're good?
Well, one thing's for sure, if we don't approve it, the government would come in and want to build 9-story Soviet-style apartments right there in the middle of that community. So I move to approve.
So you moved
You're
to
just
approve.
in the mood, aren't you?
I'll second Councilman Duncan's motion.
We know where you stand, Bob. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, so that takes us to item number 11, and this is a public hearing. So I'll open the public hearing. This is just a continuance, is it, Ben?
That is correct. So after we had noticed the project for this particular public hearing date, the applicant did inform me that they had an unexpected emergency come up, and so they were unable to get their team to be available for this meeting and requested to continue it to February 8th. So the formal presentation for the project would be on that subsequent meeting.
On the 8th of February? All right, so then I'll close the public.
Don't we have to keep it open? and
Oh, we
ask
just keep
for-
it open, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
And then we have to
We'll
ask for
just-
comments?
If there's anybody that wants to make comments this evening that is not able to make comments next meeting, for whatever reason, you may want to allow that opportunity.
I have no comments. Public comment.
So we just leave it at that? We leave the public hearing open until
Yeah,
February 8th?
continue to the next meeting, date certain.
Okay. So that takes us into the study session, item number 12. I know,
Mr. Mayor?
I think you need a
before-
motion to continue if you wouldn't.
oh, we need a motion, I'm sorry.
I move to continue the public hearing for case number 19-020/GCUP/TTM 20263 to the city council meeting of February 8th, 2021.
Second.
All right, so a motion to continue. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Thank you much. That takes us to a study session, and I know Mr. Avila, Councilmember Avila has something.
Yes, thank you. For the benefit of city council and to the public at large, the AVA study areas are within 500 feet of my residence, and therefore there's potential conflict of interest, and so I must excuse and recuse myself from this study.
All right. For the record, I do have a number of speaker slips on this item, so after the presentation,
All right. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. One, I just want to confirm that Sheila and Karen are on the line.
Yes, we are.
All right. So then we will get started. So tonight essentially is a study session regarding the phase 1 of the AVA implementation planning process or project that we have been working on. Kind of going over the process to where we got to where we are now and kind of the goals of kind of the future AVA implementation, a review of the phase 1 report, discussing kind of the alternatives or kind of the different planning tools that we can use and getting direction on the next steps to actually develop those appropriate tools. And so I'll kind of summarize kind of the history of why we are here now. American Viticulture Area, or AVA, is a specific type of appellation of origin used on wine labels to identify a grape growing region and also identify specific kind of characteristics of that region to help distinguish it from other stuff. So it really is an important marketing tool for growers of grapes to kind of identify that this is where those grapes are from. Some AVAs are kind of larger scale, and then they may have sub-AVAs as well. As part of the growing interest for growing grapes in the city of Yucaipa, the Yucaipa Valley Wine Alliance had submitted an AVA petition to the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau for the Yucaipa AVA. Now, this area itself encompasses about 30,000 acres covering the city of Yucaipa and then also adjacent areas. And so it's essentially allowing or kind of providing Yucaipa designation for grapes grown, provided that the AVA petition is approved. Now, however, there is currently no provisions in the city's development code to permit commercial wineries within the vacant land areas of the city. And so as a result of the growing interest for wine growing and the fact that we don't have provisions in place that help guide those looking to establish wineries, the goal itself through this process is to explore the best approach that will help guide those looking to establish a winery should the AVA petition be approved, and then as the interest to establish wineries in the city continues to grow. Now, as part of it, also recognizing that there's a multitude of perspectives that shape our city, our approach needs to address those various needs on kind of the long-term planning of the city, including those to help facilitate the AVA implementation, and then ultimately to develop a plan and approach that provides some degree of community consensus that helps to promote the Yucaipa style. So it's blending a lot of different interests with this kind of unique and kind of exciting project that was submitted. Now, as I noted before, the AVA petition itself is beyond the boundaries of the city limits, and so this map kind of shows in yellow the current designation of the proposed AVA petition, and then the red shows the city limit, so it is a broader area beyond the city boundaries itself. And then as noted, so the AVA designation does apply citywide. However, existing development in parts of the city would limit the viability of a wine industry in those parts due to limited available land. And so, you know, an area like Chapman Heights, for example, isn't going to be suitable for a wine industry just because there isn't available land to grow grapes. And so with that, kind of the biggest aggregate of vacant land within the city of Yucaipa is within the freeway corridor specific plan and then the North Bench area. Now, as I kind of noted here, this is a really unique endeavor. We do not have agricultural land use district in the city, and there's not an established growing wine region in the city. So unlike other AVAs are established, there has been a history of grape growing in that place, and essentially we're doing the opposite. Philosophy is how do we create an industry, how do we encourage grape growing to occur, and then how do we also, in the context of that, create a Yucaipa style that's appropriate for the context of the city, also recognizing the existing context or development context and constraints of the city as we move forward. And because there isn't really a roadmap on how to do this, we're kind of venturing into new territory. The process for AVA implementation kind of was broken into two phases. The phase one itself is initial research to really understand what are the needs and kind of opportunities and appropriate areas and different tools other jurisdictions have used. And then phase two would then be the actual development of that tool. To help with this activity, the Yucaipa City Council did approve the establishment of the AVA Planning Committee. And then as noted before, because we have a variety of different perspectives that are important to the city, different stakeholders, the AVA Planning Committee was an attempt to provide a broad brush of that and included 2 council members, 2 planning commissioner members, Trails and Open Space member, 1 member of the EDAT committee, a large vacant property owner, so someone that could theoretically be one of the sites for a future vineyard, a designated member from the Yucaipa Valley Wine Alliance, and then 3 at-large members, or just general members of the public. Now, the Wine Alliance member, the large property owner, and all the 3 at-large members do have experience in the wine industry, so they all had perspectives in terms of either grape growing process, running a winery, or other kind of benefits that were important in understanding some of the needs for that wine industry. And then also to support the research, extensive stakeholder meetings also occurred. Now, as everyone is aware, this process itself aligned a lot with the COVID-19 pandemic, and so part of our public outreach strategy did have to be adjusted so that we can still maintain feedback from interested individuals, but also being cognizant that some of the typical planning outreach efforts weren't going to be feasible. However, through the AVA Plan Committee meetings and the stakeholder engagement, we still had a lot of good participation from those members as well as members of the public that either commented or attended the meetings or phoned in virtually as well. And then ultimately, based on tonight's direction from the phase 1 research and findings, phase 2 is to actually develop the appropriate tool. And then to support the implementation, staff does intend to include an economic feasibility analysis so that as specific provisions are developed, we can make sure that it's addressing some of the market needs as well. And then certainly in light of the COVID-19 issues we had for phase 1, additional outreach efforts is intended to occur so that we can help refine the approach and gain greater community consensus through the process. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, the approach does need to comply with law and ultimately provide a way to help facilitate the processing of commercial winery application. Now, as I kind of noted, the AVA petition itself is throughout the city, and then we have kind of 2 vacant land areas. However, through the discussion of the phase 1 process, the committee members and kind of everyone that was involved in that discussions, including the Wine Alliance, really the North Bench was the topic of discussion. Whenever people referenced the wine growing area, the North Bench was the de facto response. And so as a result of that, that is kind of where our study area has focused on. And then this map is really to help kind of define it, that area itself. It's kind of broken up into 2 different spots. However, I do want to note, this is just something that we developed to help kind of focus our area in, since that's where the committee had guided us. However, it can be modified to include some of the vacant land near that area, including the vacant land adjacent to the chicken ranches and the chicken ranches themselves, should council want to also incentivize some of the redevelopment of those areas. And then also of note is we do have 2 different properties with a little bit more acreage under vine. One is North Court Winery, which is outside the city limits on Yucaipa Ridge Road, and they have a little tasting room as well. And then there's also Cesar Roldan has a property on Pendleton Road that has also planted vines as well. So there are some spots where people may be growing grapes outside of kind of the study area, but this is the greatest vacant land to where an actual industry could probably thrive. And so this is just an aerial kind of showing the existing conditions of the area, showing Jefferson and Carter Street, and then Jefferson Street and Oakland Road. So this being kind of the large swath of vacant land that's available in the North Bench that could have the potential for future wineries. Now, as part of the phase 1 process, we did analyze a lot of the existing context of the city, including the general plan and all the different land use maps that we have. As noted, the city itself does not have an agricultural zoning. The North Bench area itself is zoned as residential. And then not only is the North Bench zoned as residential, but most of that area also has residential projects that have been approved through a tentative map process. And then there are the land use rights that are granted thereof as a result of those approvals. And so a key challenge that was, I think, kind of a topic of discussion for the AVA Plan Committee is then how do we encourage a different type of development, and how do we not violate their state law or their property owner rights as well? And then further, we did overlay some of the approved tentative maps just to kind of give a visual reference of kind of what the designs look like. Now, because of the current configurations, there really isn't assuming that those lots are built as approved, there really isn't a way to help facilitate vineyard development, at least to any sort of commercial industrial scale that would support an actual industry. And so that was part of a big focus of the question is, okay, we have this existing constraint, how do we change that approach and make something that is viable for a wine industry to occur? And then also kind of noted, we did analyze some of the topography of the site, and so the existing grades and the topography and geography of the area does make it as a good sense to consider a solution for allowing for vineyards to occur in this area. Now, through the outreach efforts, we also developed guiding principles with a large degree of consensus. This is really taking, as we develop the tool, different components that the committee and interested parties felt that was worth keeping. And so one, kind of the key standout, as we know, Yucaipa does have a very rural atmosphere, and so whatever design or kind of the build out of this industry needs to help support that rural atmosphere and be designed in a way that helps enhance and maintain that design. And so part of it's kind of looking at different wine regions. So Temecula being an example where it's a lot more commercialized, and that was certainly the sentiment is we don't want to have these large, massive resorts and other types of facilities. We want it to be more boutique and smaller scale and kind of more eclectic and artisan. The other one is honoring the rights of existing property owners. A lot of the committee members certainly were supportive of maintaining property owner rights, and so that is a principle that was also there. Also making sure we have a planned approach, that the idea that we're not chasing problems and trying to fix them after they start, but rather being proactive to address maybe potential compatibility issues or other impacts that occur, making sure that we're being ahead of it and making good decisions to promote an industry that isn't fighting with existing residents in the city. And then also supporting encouraging sustainable winemaking practices. And then also allowing, good accessory uses that help support the market viability of that, including the tasting rooms and maybe small bed and breakfast inns with infrastructure permits. And so this really is right above is kind of a word cloud that shows some of the key comments that the committee members, focus in on. And so as you see, the top one is the rural atmosphere. And so the urban design component of the implementation is going to be, I think, a very crucial issue based on that. And then finally, we also develop a visioning statement. This isn't the 100% visioning statement, but at least establishes kind of the goal where we want to work towards and kind of the long term. And so some of the feedback we did get, though, is tying some of the language here to the general plan vision, but itself is, encouraging a strong wine region that, is sustainable, is marketable, but then also maintains the rural atmosphere and protects the city's amenities and natural resources that we have, and using that to help leverage the overall project as well. Now, based on kind of the different approaches, we had developed 3 different alternatives based on the feedback through the phase 1. Also noted, based on the stakeholder outreach and workshop in Temecula, a few things are kind of key on the implementation. One is we do want to promote an authentic region. We don't want to just give tasting rooms and other commercial uses without someone that isn't really providing, growing grapes on site and actually creating a winery destination that is quality. We want to make sure that it isn't just a false front and someone just making a lot of money selling wine without actually supporting the region itself. And then also the other component and part of the implementation is having the process simple for those that are looking to start. So really limiting the cost up front, because there is a significant investment required to establish a commercial winery and get that to fruition. So it's trying to reduce whatever city impediments we have through that process. And so the 3 alternatives I'll just go talk about is the first one was a transfer of density rights, essentially where you have a sending area where the residential rights are sold voluntarily. So that's the existing tentative maps and the existing residential areas. Those property owners would sold it off to someone else to essentially use that land for just vineyards, and an easement would be recorded so that they couldn't do future residential development, and then that density would then be shifted to other parts of the community. So if a property owner has 100 unit rights on it, they would sell off those 100 units to someone else that would then be able to upzone their area respectively by that 100 units. And then the cost itself is absorbed in the selling price of that. Kind of the tools that would happen is setting up overlay zones where you have kind of the sending areas and receiving areas, and then doing the appropriate environmental analysis to support that. As part of the AVA Plan Committee, this was not the preferred alternative. Some of the concern was the complexity of the transfer of development rights, and then certainly existing neighborhoods or existing areas essentially being upzoned through the transfer of density rights without it being necessarily as a planned activity initially as at the onset of the project. The other one itself, the other alternative is the clustering option, where it's based on a comprehensive specific plan that's developed. The existing unit rights or the development potential of the residential uses essentially stay in the area, so they're not being upzoned in other parts of the community, but are staying where they would have been anyways, but then the units themselves are consolidated to provide the maximum acreage for viticulture. So it's really allowing shifting areas so that you can create larger swaths of new agriculturally zoned land, and then shifting the residential areas kind of out of the way so that it isn't competing with some of the vineyard stuff. One of the benefits kind of associated with this kind of master plan approach is then you can also establish any open space trails and natural buffers between the uses through that specific plan provisions. And then as part of the consolidation of the existing development potential, certain areas, then you can also establish conservation easements for the new vineyards that are established. And then as part of this, as we've talked about in prior meetings, California state housing law has been pretty difficult to work with. And so this one itself conforms to California state housing law without intensifying existing neighborhoods. And then essentially this approach would be implemented through a specific plan, and then the general plan EIR would be analyzed to see if we can do an addendum for it or do an EIR specific for that area as well. Now, as part of the phase one approach, the AVA Planning Committee did find this as the more preferred alternative. They did have a few different notes on the design. One is some modifications to the bubbles that we have here to kind of work a little bit better, but this is more of an illustrative purpose, but at least recognizing that since we're not upzoning other areas, this is a good way to kind of blend the two different requirements that we have. And so this was the preferred alternative, or had the highest degree of consensus as part of the AVA Plan Committee. And then just want to touch on kind of context. So this approach itself has been established in other areas. One of the case studies that we had is the town of Livermore. And one of the wineries that they have there is Wente Estates, established in 1883. It's one of the oldest or longest continuously owned family winery in the U.S. And it's really one of the ones that started sustainability practices in their operation. But essentially they have, to help preserve some of their ag land, done both part of a TDR approach, but then also did clustering housing as part of the implementation. And so here's some images just kind of showing where you have kind of a natural buffer between the vineyards, the housing, and then using that to essentially keep as much land available for agricultural uses without impeding some of the residential land use rights that currently exist. And then the third one that was presented or provided to us is a tiered winery zoning ordinance. One of the really beneficial things about this approach is it establishes a scale based on wine production levels, which promotes the authenticity of the industry. So essentially, rather than saying if you have 5 acres, you can have a tasting room or something like that, it really establishes if you're producing so much wine, then you can have so many amenities. And so it really encourages that a property provides adequate production levels rather than just a size requirement. And so that's one way to help promote authenticity, which those provisions I think are very a good way to help achieve some of that. However, this approach itself does not address the California housing law requirements. But because of some of the benefits of how this ordinance is structured, there is the option to certainly combine this with the other two alternatives. And then using some of those provisions on the production levels can help establish what your capacity is, then gives you the approach for approval of the accessory wine uses. And then because this approach itself is just a code, each project itself, if this approach was selected on its own, each project itself would be subject to separate environmental review. And then again, would have to deal with the no net loss housing issues as part of each project approval as well. And so in the phase one report, we did provide kind of a planning tool, just kind of a snapshot of some of the different components. The alternative 3, the zoning code, is kind of the easiest one to implement, but definitely has, in terms of some of the challenges and concerns that the community had, doesn't necessarily address those as proactively. And then alternative 2, which is the specific plan, is probably the most intensive upfront, but then through the process has the greatest degree of certainty on the implementation. So if you're a person buying a facility wanting to establish a winery, your standards are there, and then that's all that you have to do. And so with that, that does kind of conclude my presentation. I do want to note as well that the city had received $250,000 in funding from the State Department of Conservation to support phase 2. They are excited about the project, as we are, especially since the project is intended to create agricultural land rather than other places that are trying to just preserve it. And then the city will also continue to pursue other grant opportunities to help the establishment based on council's direction. And that concludes my presentation. And then Sheila and Karen with Placeworks are also available. They were the team that helped us work on this project and develop the phase 1 report. And they're happy to answer questions as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Great presentation. I do have a number of speaker slips here. I'd like to hear from them. You guys okay with hearing from them first before we open it up for discussion? Our first speaker is Donna Snodgrass. You know, I keep forgetting to ask people to state their name and their address, but. And after Donna, I will have Denise work.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Donna Snodgrass. I live at 10345 Walnut Grove Court on the North Bench by the old Via's Turkey Ranch, which could also be part of this project, by the way. I only got this presentation this afternoon, so if I have a little more than 3 minutes, because I was taking notes as the young man here was talking very rapidly, as young people do these days. By the way, if you revisit the logo after this project is all over, please be sure that there are vineyards included on that logo. I have a couple of concerns with what I've been able to read on the report and after listening tonight. First is that there seems to be a melding or a confusion of AVA, the American Viticultural Area, with wineries. They're not the same thing. We can plant vineyards without having wineries. And I hope we're not discouraging the agricultural part of planting vineyards and selling the grapes, which is a commercial effort. But as my husband and I have been planting our vineyard, we've discovered that we are now classified as a farm because of the acreage, and we will be selling the produce. So a lot of things change for us personally and for our property when that designation takes place. The vote that was taken for the cluster housing was overwhelmingly, unfortunately, by real estate and development individuals that attended that meeting that day. The vineyard, the Yucaipa Valley Wine Alliance representatives unanimously opposed that. So there seems to be a divide between vineyard growers, winery advocates, and housing. So we've got to work a little harder to come together with those ideas. That was that one. With the clustered housing, just for our area right here, and especially if we're going to concentrate on the North Bench with traffic and other concerns that will happen up there, because we all know how beautiful and rural it is, it's just not going to work. And that's where the alliance is. By the way, I was just elected as vice president of the Yucaipa Valley Wine Alliance. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. We did notice that one of the diagrams that are included in the report, I'm sure you haven't had a chance to read this whole report, and I was hoping we could all go through it a little more, but it's going to take more than one night to do that. One of the diagrams that's drawn and included in this, I actually found it on a commercial website for one of the committee members, and it's already listed as our projects as if it's already underway. So I have great concern that...
Donna, I'm going to go ahead and give you an extra 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Thank you very much.
All
I
right.
appreciate that. So we now have some concerns that this project is already being developed and something's going on outside of the committee, which I believe AVA committee has been misnamed as well. So there's a lot of suspicion there that there's other things happening behind the scenes. The residents on the North Bench, you've probably all heard about a petition effort, which I have been heading up that petition effort. The residents on the North Bench have overwhelmingly opposed the idea of the cluster housing up there. Now, we had to stop the effort due to things like holidays, COVID, and election fatigue, among a bunch of other things. But we're about to resume that effort, and it will start again on Wednesday. And I expect to get many, many more signatures on the petition for no cluster housing on the bench. Doesn't mean we're trying to stop the housing. We know there's approved housing up there. We're not trying to stop those 1 acre lots that's been approved many, many, many years. But reducing the lot size is what's being opposed. Let me see. What else? Those are just my thumbnail concerns, because like I said, nobody's had time to really digest this report. I did read the appendixes, the first report by the city planner. Excellent, excellent. I really appreciate that report and what you put in here. He covered all the issues and that this is viable. I'd like to be competing with Temecula and do it better here in Yucaipa, combine it with Oak Glen. We have a vision and there are other efforts and business plans being drawn as we speak right now to try and make this work for the North Bench and not, how do I use a word that can be published? Not mess with the current property owners that are up there that want to develop those 1 acre lots.
All right, thank you, Donna. Denise, work.
Poke my eye out. Okay. Good evening. Denise Work, 37202 Lime Kiln Drive, Yucaipa. As being on the Planning Commission at the time, I was on this committee and the chairperson of the AVA committee. And first, I want to say that, Ben, you've done a great job and appreciate it very much. And Ray as well, the support for the committee and the work that was done, and Sheila at Playworks. I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I'll take issue that the previous speaker asserted regarding developers and realtors liking option 2. I'm neither, okay? And as I said, I was the chair of this committee. I am not in favor really of any of these in whole. You know, there are parts of 2 and 3 that I like, and number 1, no way. I don't think that would ever fly. I don't believe that we should be trading densities, and because that density's got to go somewhere else in the city and to your 9-story buildings or whatever that you were talking about, Bobby. So the concerns that I have are that the special interest of the Wine Growers Association, they don't seem to understand that the city's pressures, which I'm just more inclined to go that way because of my years on the Planning Commission. So the pressures that are on the city by the state of California, meeting our RENA numbers and a housing element and all of those things. And if we take it from that interest that says we want to have wineries and grow grapes, then we're going to that density has to go somewhere. We have that pressure, and I don't think there are a lot of citizens that would like that to happen in their neighborhood. So these are just considerations and things that need to be thought of, and that's why the cluster housing is much better than any of the other alternatives, because you still are able to meet some of those requirements that we've already been counted in our regional housing needs assessment from the state of California. And the state of California, that they've increased those numbers. They're not going down. They want us to build more. And they're saying when you're out of land, you can build up. And of course, I had a little problem with the league a couple years ago when I told them, they said, you can go up, you can build a 5-story. I said, well, our fire department can only fight a fire to 3 stories, so that doesn't really work for us. And this is a rural community, and I think it needs to stay rural. I love the idea of having vineyards. I would much prefer vineyards and not very many wineries, quite honestly. So those are all my observations. One more thing is water. I never got an answer. How much water does it take to grow grapes versus to supply housing? Is there an offset? I don't know.
I think that would be in the discussion at a later date.
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Denise.
That's what I kept hearing, so I'm
Right.
just saying, I
Right.
don't know.
Okay, Caesar, is it Roldan?
Good evening. Cesar Roldan, 11727 Pendleton Road, owner of what we are still debating with my wife on the Bug Hill Vineyard. So I don't have the exact numbers, but I can tell you that the water consumption on Vines compared to housing is gonna be tremendously a difference. The water consumption on Vines, it's a lot lower, tremendously lower. Not only could we use recycled water for Vines, which we can't use for housing, but that is something that if you guys allow us to bring back, we can definitely bring back those numbers. Also serving as the secretary of the Yucaipa Wine Alliance, there are a lot of concerns, and one of the things, I think there's a confusion that we want to somehow violate the rights of the homeowners or the property owners of the North Bench, and that's not the case. What we don't want to see is being able to reduce that 1 acre lots to half acre or even quarter acres, which we've heard rumors that that's kind of what's been proposed. And seeing that developer's website promoting the Yucaipa, or I'm sorry, the Serrano Vineyards already as a project that it's coming on the way, that's where the concern comes, that some things are happening behind the scenes that are not being brought up to the public. So just some of the concerns here is we want to see a viable wine country and wine industry developed out of Yucaipa because it is one of the few things that Yucaipa has, the location, the ecosystem, and the soil to be able to produce this, to no longer make it just a commuter town, but actually create something out of Yucaipa. We were talking about the pride of the logo and things like that. Yucaipa, I believe, can now be also rebranded, or the branding will take a higher level when we start bringing a wine industry into this region. And I will go on record as saying that it would not even be a competition to Temecula because the location that we're in, I know we're gonna produce a lot better product than Temecula can ever offer because of the location that we're in. So I just wanted to give it my 2 cents and go on record as saying that there is a lot of confusion going on of what actually we want to do as an endeavor with the Yucaipa Wine Alliance and what the AVA stands for, than the cluster housing. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Caesar. Christine Moeller?
That was a pretty bold statement. Better than Temecula. Wow.
Hi, my name is Christine Moeller. My address is 34440 Fawn Ridge Place in Yucaipa, right here in Chapman Heights. You know, I sit on the Trails and Open Space Committee, and I also sit on the AVA Committee, and I have the pleasure of doing that. It's really an honor to be able to put my 2 cents in and to care and to communicate my passion. I've been sitting on committees for probably over 20 years. And, you know, the committee process really works because, you know, they take people from city council and planning commission and trails and open space, and they take everybody, a little bit piece of everybody, and they tell us, go communicate and talk to people that you recreate with and come back to the trails and, to the AVA committee and, you know, give us your input and everything. So I try to do that with our committee, and it's on our agenda. We talk about it every month during our trail meeting because it's really important. What I think is really important to share with the city council is we are not in the business of winemaking or viticulture or anything like that. You're the stewards of doing what you think is the best thing for the city of Yucaipa and the citizens. Yeah, that area is absolutely stunning. Would it be great for viticulture? Absolutely. My God, it would be just beautiful. But for me, can you put the picture of that area up there? Part of that area up there that we're talking about is the Five Winds Ranch and the El Dorado. So that area is going to remain open, and it'll always remain open like that. There's several different landowners that have presented their plans to the AVA committee, and they all have different ideas. One wants to build a 5-story hotel and wants to put it right there on Oak Glen, right road. Well, that's not exactly what I have in mind. I want to see boutique, small wineries. I don't want to see it from Oak Glen Road. I want to see viticulture, and I want it to be done very well and with quality. I did take the tour that the city staff took to Temecula, and I sat in the meeting with the city staff and the mayor and everybody, and we talked about it, and they said quality was paramount. So, when we talk about landowners' rights and things like that, lot density and density transfers are ridiculous. It doesn't work. So the idea of taking lot densities from the North Bench and transferring it into different areas of Yucaipa doesn't make sense. It's just a function of selling out of those values. Of course, we don't want to see a bunch of cluster housing up there, but guess what? There's no infrastructure up there. The housing element is required in order to pay for the infrastructure, because guess what? Yucaipa's not going to do it. Yucaipa does not pay for these type of things so people can come in here and build wineries or, vitify whatever they want, right? So there has to be some source of compromise between, housing, and I don't want to see everybody cluster housing. I want to see if there's 100 houses available for building up there. I want to see a third of housing. I want to see a third of that built on smaller lots, the rest of it done very, very well. And as far as the city of Yucaipa goes, I think one of the things that makes us so wonderful and unique is that the planning is paramount. We plan everything. City Hall looks beautiful. The community center looks beautiful. YPAC, everything we do is planned and done to the T, and we pay for it. That's the
Christine,
way
can I
we
ask you a
roll.
quick question?
Of course.
So of the alternatives, are you leaning towards alternative 3?
Yeah, the cluster housing.
Oh, you're like alternative
Yeah,
2?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, and
Just for-
I don't, and not the high dense, right? You don't give them 100% of what they're capable of building. You have to come to some compromise. So I'd like to see it less than maybe 30% of what they're able to build
Okay.
on smaller lots.
Thank you. All right, so for the record, this is a study session. We're not taking any definitive action at this point. Are we, Ray?
This is a study session, and you may ask us to move forward with Phase 2 if you feel like we're close enough with this, with the direction we get this evening, but not necessary. You may want to have us come back with more information. That's certainly up to you.
So we have two different actions. We have, or things to discuss, whether we should move to Phase 2 and then which alternative we prefer.
I think that would be helpful to, let us know whether you have a preference in alternatives, a combination of alternatives, and then we can take that information and move forward with Phase 2 if you're okay with us doing that.
And I will note the direction that's received through this study session, we will use that to create the scope of work for Phase 2 and then ultimately come back to City Council with a contract for that specific project.
And sorry, one more thing for the record. I think you do have 2 other public comments that came in as well.
Okay.
A letter from earlier today.
Just to be read in?
Yeah, just for the record, they were distributed.
Okay. I do see one of the property owners up in that area, if they're interested in saying anything, or I had to throw it out there. If not, it's fine. Okay, so let's start. Bob, do you want to start with what your thoughts are on the different alternatives, or?
I attended most of these meetings in person or via Zoom. And so what are we deciding tonight, or what are we talking about tonight? We're talking about, we sat through these meetings, we had a lot of options, a lot of input, and that is what we have here in front of us in this booklet is the various options or the various input that we received from everyone on the committee. So are we going to pick some portion of this to move into Phase 2? Or are we going to utilize all of this as we move into Phase 2? Do we have to pick clustered, not clustered? Do we have to pick tonight what you want in order to move into Phase 2? Or do we use all of this going into Phase 2?
So essentially, you're correct that we have provided kind of the summary of all the research that was done through Phase 1, and then we have provided through the AVA Plan Committee what kind of the general consensus was on the approach to take. If, as part of the action, City Council can select one of the alternatives, or they can say, I prefer, let's say, one of the alternatives, but I want to see parts of the other alternative or other 2 alternatives also carry through, and then that way we know. So if we want to implement, let's say, a transfer density right program, then we can include that scope. or if there's a specific plan, or if the code, or some combination thereof. But it really, there's some flexibility on the ultimate approach, but it's really weighing kind of what's the heavy focus of it, and then there can be other elements that we still add in as part of that process as well as we approach phase two. And then certainly additional outreach as part of that scope of work will also be important to help really refine what the true approach or the true standards are.
So we're going to develop an overlay for the North Bench or for our city that says, in this area, you can do this or this or this. We're not going to specify you've got to do this, right? And this meaning clustered housing, so many per acre. Yes?
Yeah,
No?
the idea is to create the planning methodology for folks, to encourage folks to incorporate vinification, wineries, ancillary uses into the North Bench, generally the North Bench area. That was the focused area. There are several different ways to do that that we talked about today. The transfer of development rights from the North Bench to other parts of the community. You could also, by the way, transfer development rights within the North Bench among the different property owners in the North Bench. And then clustering is focused on the same larger property where you cluster housing and parts of the property in the vineyards or wine tasting rooms, ancillary uses in other parts of that same property. That's the biggest difference between the two. And I would suggest that the third option is something that would be considered in concert with the other two, the zoning or the planning documents that San Diego has put together. I think they are valuable in terms of making sure that production is an important part of the whatever methodologies are used. But the TDR or the clustering probably is the most direct of the two options, of the three options, are the most direct in terms of giving the property owners the certainty that they're looking for in making investments.
So I remember when the Casablanca project came before the city of Yucaipa, long before the government in the state of California decided that every square inch needs to be apartments. But that property, that project had various size lots and had a lot of open space. That would have been sort of comparable, I think, to clustered housing, right? Kind of, sort of?
Correct. It's just rather than open space, it would be some open space, but more vineyards and wineries, yes.
And then we had the Gail Crosby version of it, where she had gone to Laird and the Casablanca property and laid it out 5 acres here with a nice 4,000 square foot house and vineyards around that property, and then 2 acres with a nice house and vineyards. And I thought that was a really nice approach, but of course, the government's not going to like that at all because there's too much open space. I believe that we need to obviously protect the rights of the property owners, and that's, for me, that's first and foremost. But secondly, we need to make sure that we don't cut down the number of houses in that whole area. Otherwise, once this gets flagged somewhere, once there's a flag that goes up that says we've got a hillside ordinance, this government's not going to like a hillside ordinance at all. I do. They're not. Once they find out we've got 1 acre lots on the North Bench, and they're not going to like that at all. So us being prudent in however we proceed as far as making sure we don't cut down the number of units, I'm all for that. Whether it's transfer, selling, transfer out, or developing the number of houses, whether you call it cluster or otherwise, and make sure we get the same amount of houses in there. I'm all for that as well. We have to do that. We have to do that, I think.
Okay, so the way I read you, just so I understand, you're kind of leaning toward the cluster alternative 2? Is that what I'm
I don't see
understanding?
how we could not
Okay.
have that as part of our plan. I don't see how we could not.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean, I don't think, honestly, I don't think the citizens of Yucaipa realize yet, because they're not privy to what we're privy to, they don't realize how serious this state is about coming in and completely changing how we live as far as apartments to accommodate low-end folks. I mean, I have nothing against that as far as low-end folks, but we have to make sure we develop this place so it stays rural the way we want it. We love this place. We don't want to change it to the point where it looks like other places.
All right, I'll go next if that okay, unless you want to go. I think I agree with Bob for the most part. We do have to balance housing with the rural. If it were truly up to me, I'd leave it rural, but we don't get to. It's really not the case. We don't really get to zone out all building. It's not how it works. Not in California. It may work in other states, but not in California. And the property owner bought the property with a certain zoning, with a certain density. I know we did go through this process a while back, and I do remember I was one that I actually liked the proposal by the owner, where he did kind of cluster the homes already instead of just massive 1-acre lots, and there were homes over the entire property. I did think that was a superior project. I don't think this TDR program is going to really work. I don't see that really happening. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Perhaps it will, but it just doesn't work. So my option would be to go to alternative 2, which is the cluster housing. I guess that's all I have to say. Justin, John?
Well, I like option 2, however, and that's probably putting the cart before the horse here, but as I look at it, we need to really consider some traffic mitigation to those neighborhoods, I think. The way option 2 is laid out here, some of these side streets going through those neighborhoods in years past, I believe, have had some traffic concerns. I think adding those wineries and wine tasting rooms and things up there might be a legitimate concern on their part, how we're going to mitigate that traffic, or how it's laid out to handle that influx. But of the 3 options, I would lean towards the option 2.
Okay.
I'd like to piggyback and amplify Councilman Thorpe's concern over traffic, specifically traffic hazards and public safety. Additionally, the other concerns that come into any plan, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, there's a new burden on our law enforcement. I've brought this up in meetings as it relates to rural crime and the crimes that come from these type of projects, thefts of grapes, and the burden that could be placed on our law enforcement. As it relates to just the housing, I think I find myself in disagreeing slightly with Councilman Duncan in that the state mandates also require the development of, the wording escapes me, it's low, very low, low, moderate, and then there's high end.
Above moderate, yeah.
Okay, so I don't think that by taking from 1 acre to half acre, we're eliminating a demographic off of our requirements. I think there's a requirement that we build all types of houses to include high-end houses. With that being said, however, the landowner has had the opportunity to develop that land into acre lots for quite some time, and there's a reason he hasn't, and that's because the market is not sustainable for 1 acre lots. If it was, they'd be sold already, and I could buy a house up there on an acre. So I think being mindful of the market needs of these landowners and what they're able to do with it is something that this council needs to be considerate of as well. So with that being said, I am also leaning towards 2. I've seen some conceptual ideas for what I think could look nice. I'm not very good at imagining what it looks like, so I would like to see some more concept ideas. I did like what I saw as far as Livermore's, what it looks like now. That was helpful to me. But I I would lean more towards 2. With that being said, I want to thank the public speakers for coming in. It makes it a lot easier for us to decide on things up here when we know what our public are thinking, and then as opposed to making decisions and then being crucified for it throughout the week on social media. So thank you for that. But I want to encourage more of it, please. Let us know more about it. I know that I am accessible. Get a hold of me. Let me know what you think so I can appropriately relay your sentiments from the dais.
All right, so we have, looks like we have 4 for clustering alternative 2 at this point. So at this point, we need to give you direction on moving into the second phase. Are you guys okay with that?
I am.
I have a question about this chart here. I spent some time trying to figure this out. Looking at this chart, there's a lot of yeses on the far right. And then there's some no's and no's. Is this like a comparison of saying, this far right here says wine country specific plan, MND or EIR. The cost is really high compared to the other 2, but it looks like that's the way to go, even though the cost is high, to make sure that we get what we want.
A combination of making sure we get what we want. There will be more detail in that approach in terms of requirements, guidelines, that sort of thing. But also more certainty with the property owner that has to make that decision to invest in vineyards and wineries because of the time it takes to recoup that investment.
As I noted kind of early in the presentation, the 3 alternatives all have kind of their different pros and cons. The alternative 2 checks off a lot of the variables or concerns that we may have, but certainly the most robust up front as well. And so it's that trade-off versus other ones may not address all of those concerns, but it's cheaper to start with, but then we may have to chase some of those issues later on as well.
Okay.
Good. So do you have clear direction at this point, Ray?
We do.
Ben?
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Are you good? All right. So that's going to take us to,
Should we get Dave back in, or did he go home?
I actually think Dave may have, he may be home. I think he's hanging out with the president of the
We want
chamber.
to check. Check and see if he's in there still. We don't want to assume.
Yeah. He asked me if it was okay if he took off, and I thought it would be fine, so.
Yes, it's the last item.
Thanks for coming.
I do have an announcement that I can make.
Okay.
You guys are doing your announcements if you like.
Done? All right. So moving on to announcements. Go ahead, Ray.
I meant to do this in the presentation, and I apologize, but we have worked with the county to host a vaccination site here in town at the community center, and I will let you.
Where is it?
At the community center.
The community center?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I will let you know more about that as it rolls out, but we pushed for it early on, and so we moved into the MOU with them for it, and I will keep you up to date on the schedule. So.
All right. Great news.
Yeah.
All right. So announcements. Councilmember Thorpe, you have
Alrighty.
anything? Nothing? Just
Got nothing.
Nothing.
nothing. All right. So we don't have a closed session. Thank you for attending, and we will close this council meeting.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Dave.